Well, good afternoon, those of you in the UK, and good morning to those of you from across the pond. Welcome to this session this afternoon. I hope you are in for a very good session with us. We are excited to be joining you wherever you are in the world. I can see we've got people from Scotland, Wolverhampton, Doncaster, all over. We've got a friend from Cape Town. I have no idea what time it is in Cape Town. And we are bound for a fantastic hour ahead. My name is Anthony Williams, and I am here as your host this afternoon, and delighted to be hosting this session. Now, often I get asked to chair sessions for learning technologies, and I always say I will do it on two conditions. Number one, can we talk about a topic that really makes a difference, something that is actually going to help us be more effective in our roles within L&D? And I can absolutely tell you that we have hit the mark on this one. This session is going to be fantastic. We're going to be talking about really going beyond delivering programs, moving more holistically, engaging with our business, and really linking values and performance. So that's objective number one, something that I think we will all find really useful. And number two is, can I please be paired with a speaker who not only knows what they're talking about, but is also someone who I will enjoy having a conversation with, someone that I could see myself having a chat with over a coffee, or more likely a pint in the evening, and we can definitely tick that box as well. Some of you may know Nigel. Those of you who don't, there's probably three things you should know about Nigel. Number one, he is a real expert in organisational learning and will be absolutely fantastic. Number two, he has an amazing new book out, which I'm sure all of you will be rushing to buy after the session. And number three, he writes his own intros. So it would be an absolute joy if we could welcome Nigel to join us to get this session started. Good afternoon, Nigel. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Anthony. And you delivered that absolutely perfectly. And the tenor is in the post, I promise.
Fantastic.
It's good to see you. Very good to see you. And welcome, everybody.
Where are you in the world today, Nigel?
I'm in London. I'm absolutely in London. I'm not in Cape Town. Cape Town is pretty much the same time zone as us, so it's not a terrible time in Cape Town at the moment. It is if you're coming from Australia, but we're okay in Cape Town. Before I start, I just want to give a shout out to Ben and Jessica that behind the scenes, this, you may not believe this, but the seamless interaction is not due to me, it's due to Jessica and Ben. And they're absolutely amazing, making sure everything runs smoothly. And they rarely get anyone giving them a shout out. So I want to do that. And I'm really grateful to Anthony. They had to, he's not quite telling the truth. You know, it was the fifth time of asking when he finally agreed to chair this session because no one else would. And I'm very, very pleased. But Anthony has one incredibly enduring capability, which I don't have. He's a stand-up comedian. So if it all goes very pear-shaped, Anthony's going to tell a few jokes. So you've got that to look forward to as well, which is always a treat. So let's get going. And I'm going to start. I'm going to start with a true story about an event at the bus stop. And I was waiting for a bus yesterday, as I often do, and there was a woman in a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair. And the bus came and the ramp came out, and she said to me, "I'm really scared going up the ramp. I fell backwards once. Would you come with me?" I said, "Of course I'll come with you." So I went with her and I stood behind the wheelchair to make sure it didn't tip up. We went up into the bus and I made sure she was parked okay and she was all right. And I turned around, and then the bus driver started yelling at me. "Who do you think you are? You're not allowed to get on the bus from the middle door. You're trying to evade your fare. I'm going to get the police." So I thought, this is an interesting situation. So I calmly walked up to him and said, "I was asked to help." She said, "Oh, yeah, I bet you were." So the woman who's in the middle of the bus, "I did ask him." And she was really upset. And she kept saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault," which it wasn't. It was the driver's fault. So the message I take from that, which I share with you today, is please don't jump to conclusions. I'm going to say some things which may be uncomfortable, maybe what you don't want to hear, but don't jump to conclusions. Just give me 2 seconds before you yell at me and say that I'm trying to evade my learning and technologies fare or whatever. So that's the first point. The second one is that I have got some books to give away, and I'm going to get, there's a special offer on the book at the end of the presentation. I would do it at the end, and you can have a, well, is it difficult to guess why I'm doing it at the end? But I want to do that. And the third thing is that we had a big session this morning on inclusivity, and there are captions. You can put on captions so that if you want captions along the bottom of the screen, you just click on the toolbar and it's got the captions should be there for you, because I don't want anyone to not grasp or need to refresh or whatever. So that there's a little bit of help. But anyway, so without, as they say, or as Anthony probably says, without further ado, I'd like to start to talk to you about this. Now, that you probably think, oh my goodness, he's not showing that. It's so last week. And it was published last week in the journal Nature. And it is the very first complete digital mapping of a brain. In this case, a fly's brain. And that fly has 130,000 individual cells. But what's really interesting is the 50 million connections from those 130,000 cells. And what scientists hadn't realized until they did this was that those big bulges at the side are the eyes, and the rest is the brain. There are two things they learned. The first one is that the cells in the eye are linked directly to the muscles in the legs. Don't go through it. They don't have to kind of look up a manual or think a little bit about, oh, there's someone with a fly squat. What do I do? That as soon as something appears in the fly's vision, the opposite muscle triggers. So if something comes in from the left, the fly jumps right. And that is the reason why, everybody, it is impossible to kill flies, or very, very difficult to kill flies. The little Watsits have got a brain that is designed to get out the way fast. And the other thing they discovered is that the core of the brain, at the heart of the brain, is a circular series of cells, which are like a gyroscope. So that when the fly is flying, it's using that gyroscope to be able to maneuver, to stay centered and balanced, and because it does a lot of very fast maneuvering. So flies are pretty amazing, and that's a pretty amazing brain, but it's very, very like the human brain, just a little bit smaller. We have not 100,000 cells, but 80 billion cells. So the number of connections is almost a number that I can't pronounce, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce. But the point I want to make is that the fly has a little lonely life. That brain is all it's got, that brain and the world. That's how it connects. But unlike us, we have the ability to communicate with each other. And this scientist called Adam Kampf, what Adam realized, and he realized it by watching how monkeys jump from tree to tree. And it's like, how do they do that? How do they know when a tree bough is going to bend, when one is solid? How do they manage just to glide from tree to tree? Whereas if we tried to do it, we'd be on our backsides very, very quickly, and we'd lose grip and we'd go for a branch that broke. And what he concluded was that the brain of a monkey or an ape has a simulation of the world built in. And it learns that from very early monkeyhood or childhood or whatever you call a little monkey, babyhood. And it gets more and more sophisticated. So as they get older, they can cope with that environment with effort, without effort, effortlessly. And what he then realized was that we, unlike any other mammal, have what he calls a group shared simulator. So we don't learn just from our world. We learn from everyone else's world around us. We build this kind of corporate reality, and he calls that a super intelligence. And I think it is a super intelligence. And this is what a neuroscientist called Hannah Critchlow, who I admire a lot, she's at Cambridge, she wrote a book on collective intelligence. And what she says is on the screen, that our ability to discuss ideas, come up with solutions to our problems, is not us sitting there having deep, deep thoughts all on our own, but it's our ability to access other people's thoughts and other people's ideas at scale and at speed. Now, why is it then, I ask myself, if all the things I've said up to now are true, We stick people in isolation, tell them not to talk to anyone, give them individual KPIs, tell them that it's their job to perform, make it so difficult for them to ask for help that very few do, and make it so awful and impossible to offer help because you're taking away from your own great achievements. Why do we focus on individual talent, individual ability, individual drive, when the truth is that none of us are islands in isolation like that poor little fly at the beginning? We operate in that collective consciousness, whether we like it or not. And I am going to argue throughout this that if we should be enhancing that, if we enhance that, we draw on the collective consciousness, the ability of many, many people to help solve our problems, sometimes directly by working together, but often by accessing other people's smartness. And what I believe is that an organization that wants to share knowledge and wants that knowledge to reside in the organization, not the individuals, is an organization that is much more resilient, much more adaptable, much more able to act against the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So I come up with this crazy statement that it's what happens in the space between people that's important. It's the connections that really matter. And I'm just going to pause there. I know I've only been talking for 10 minutes, but I would like to ask, is there anything there, Mr. Chairman, that I should be noting in the chat? Anything? No one said a word? Or
No, well, there's
anything?
been lots of comments. Big support over the idea of socializing learning. And what occurred to me immediately there is that traditionally we've kind of rewarded ourselves on having these silos of expertise, haven't we? So we even talk about subject matter experts, and certainly in organizations I've worked in, that their expertise has been very tightly held. And I think you're absolutely right that the more we share, and I think even if I think back in L&D, you know, there was a time when we would sort of sage on the stage, kind of share our expertise very frugally. And I think you're absolutely right that organizations that thrive, it's all about how do we work together, how do we connect, how do we share, how do we grow together. So no questions at this point, but definitely some empathy with that this is the right direction, and that socializing learning is a real win. Andrew,
thanks for that. That's good.
Brilliant comment. Literally just come in. Andrew's Jacob saying social learning isn't an online forum, and he's absolutely right.
He's absolutely right. It's not. It's a way of living. Actually, it's way bigger than that. He's so right. So let's move on to the kind.
Yeah, we do go back. Yes. I think there's a slight lag. A couple of things that are literally coming in as we're speaking. So first thing, with these ideas in mind, how does AI figure into the whole equation, which I think is a great question.
It's a great question.
The question is exactly the same. Will AI help us grow, or will it not?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about that a little later on, but let me just make this point that when I was writing my book on organizational learning, AI kind of suddenly erupted in the middle of the writing process. And I paused and thought, oh my goodness, do I have to start all over again? And what I realized very quickly was that AI will galvanize all of this. And that a fragmented organization, which is full of, I can do it, I'm a talent, I'm an AI talent, you're an idiot, you don't know anything about AI, is going to rip those organizations apart. So I think AI is a classic example where it's organizational knowledge which will be important, not necessarily individual smarts. Because individual smarts will draw people from one another, not to one another. And there are already examples of that, where I was with an organization where they were hoarding prompts. So people who developed successful prompts refused to share them with any of their colleagues, because that meant they could do things a little bit faster than everyone else. And you think, this is madness. This is absolute madness. Is this about the organization you work for getting better, or is it just merely about you? Is everything at work to do with you being great, not about the organization performing? So I think organizational performance will be linked to group sharing and group knowledge, social knowledge, and AI. If we can move that fast around the organization, if we have a plan for AI, it's going to be the way forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But yes, AI is really important. I was going to say that I'm the only one who hasn't mentioned AI in the first 15 minutes of the talk, but I have. So I can't even say that anymore. Never mind. You drag me into it. But yes, AI is really, really significant in everything that I have to say. If you can imagine that wrapping around the context. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. And this is the second element that I want to talk about. One is this ability to connect, which is extremely important. But the other one is this idea of living in a system which is fair and not fearful, where we're challenged, but we're not intimidated, where we're not bullied, where we're not scared of saying what we feel or admitting we don't know, or offering help to people who maybe don't know or need a little bit of a movement. So it's this idea of autonomy and power and agency, I guess, that is important for ideas and creativity, and certainly for learning organization. And so I'm going to try and weave these two streams together in the next bit. And while I was doing the research for the book, what came to me were these 5 values as being really critical for success in this world. And I may not have got them right. They're just my perception, and you might challenge them, or there may be 6, or only 3 of them are relevant. I really don't know. But I'll just go through them very quickly, because they all reflect blockages in organizational systems, which drive me mad. And I'm only kind of partly there and partly not there. But for people working in those systems, it drives them insane. And the first is that the key word in that first one is relevant. How many people have said to me, in spite of it, I managed to make this work? In spite of those stupid procedures. Oh, we just ignore the system. We just ignore the procedures. We just get on and do it because that's the only way we can survive. So the idea of keeping your work systems and processes in regularly under review and not being scared to change them. And when you need more autonomy, creating networks and systems with layers and layers of approval required is not going to create autonomy. So if you think autonomy is important, go back and look at the systems and procedures that stop that. I used to talk a lot about creativity, and I used to say, how many layers of approval does it take to get $500? I just picked $500 at random. And a lot of big organizations, 5 layers, 6, these are senior people. They're not first week apprentices. VPs, 5 layers. And you think, well, if that's the way that it takes to get $500, you haven't got a hope of jumping ahead. You haven't got hope of being innovative, because all the innovation will be knocked out of you by the 4th or 5th layer, because it only takes one person out of the 5 to say no, and you're back to square one. The second one is something that I'm not scared of saying anymore. I used to kind of say it very quietly. You're doing something kind, be kind. Now I think we should say it out loud. Decency and human kindness are the absolute keys to unlocking people's willingness to give their unconditional support and give their effort, which only they can give. And where there is no decency and human kindness, people are defensive, and that's where fear grows. And I think we should be much more willing to do a decency and human kindness audit. And it only takes one miserable, one psycho who just proceeds without any kind of control, or with minimal control in the organization, to destroy whole communities. So I mean value, and evaluate by saying this is the way we will behave, and no exceptions. CEO or someone on the front desk, we value decency and human kindness. And I think people flourish in that environment. And we want people to flourish, and we want people to grow. And the next one is I don't think the unit of operation should be the individual. I think it's about teams and group working. So if you're setting targets, it's a team target. And that means the team can play to its strengths, and it can say, Nigel, you're hopeless at spreadsheets. I'll deal with that. You deal with this because you're really good at that. So it's the team who define their ultimate processes for getting done what they need to get done. What they're set are outcomes. This is what you need to deliver. How you do it, it's up to you. Who does what? Up to you. So recognize teams, small group working, bonus teams and small group working, and take the pressure off individuals who feel exposed and scared because they have to perform and no one's going to help them. And there are people who will want to see them fail. In a finance company I was working with, and I asked whether if business came in that you couldn't handle, would you hand it to your colleagues? And they said, what? Are you crazy? We'll miss our bonus if they perform better than us. If I give them 2 million or 4 million or 10 million pounds worth of business, that means it goes against my tally. So there were people working for one company who would deliberately disable their colleagues because it was all about them and their team. So it's not just about your team, it's about the network and connection of teams. And that's really important as well. I remember when the civil service first went into powerful teams, not individuals. It was a disaster because it just set teams against teams. So it was like a daily battle, team against team, repelling all borders. And that isn't healthy either. And then the fifth one is that just try to focus on agility and flexibility. And what's stopping people doing their best work? Why can't they leap from A to C and not have to go through B? And if you ask people, they will tell you why they can't do their best work, what is holding them back. And you should look at what's holding them back and try and disable those blockers if you possibly can. And have a work in progress. Always make the organization better, week on week, day by day, year on year, and have that in view. And I felt, and as I said, I could be wrong, that if you focused on those 5 values, then you really start to create a different kind of organization, one where knowledge can flow and where social learning is really important. And it comes a bit later, but I'll say it now. Knowing comes before knowledge. Most L&D focuses on knowledge, sharing knowledge, and you miss out on the kind of sticky, messy, gooey process, rather like flies' dinner, the kind of stuff they disgorge, all the mess that is knowing, where knowing starts to accrete and join together and eventually becomes knowledge. It's messy, but if you can stimulate processes of knowing, if you can get disparate people to share what they think they know, you pull together massive amounts of new knowledge, and that can be validated through the organization. It becomes really powerful. Anthony, you're coming on, I hope.
Oh,
Yes.
I think you've really struck a chord with the audience, I think, on these 5 values. So a few things that have come in. Lots of support, by the way, in terms of people agreeing, but some really interesting questions. So I think there's a couple of questions quite similar around culture. And in some cultures, knowledge is seen as power, hard-earned, guarded, and defines a person's social standing. In a global organization, how do we overcome this and get people to share?
Because you do the exact opposite. You value sharing, not hoarding.
Yeah.
So that if you take people who share willingly and you hold them up and you say you're just the kind of person we want, the person who hoards suddenly becomes less significant and becomes eventually so unimportant they either leave the organization or they change. So you do the opposite, and you will get different behaviors. So you have to look that very sternly in the eye, because we've been for a long time. It's all based on what you know, your qualifications, your ability, your insights, which are really important, and everyone else is a donut. And that is a bad way of building an engaged workforce. So you have to talk about that, and you have to share that, and you have to praise and reward those who are part of the team. And what you find is that those who share learn far more and get far more expertise than those who hoard. And hoarding is a cancer in an organization, and we've got to avoid that at all costs.
I think that's really
Anything
good.
else, Anthony?
Yeah, and I think it leads on brilliantly from this, because Rosie's asking, what's the best method to disrupt those ways of thinking? How do we get rid of those traditional mindsets?
But by confronting and talking, and there's always a group in the organization who are demonstrating different behaviors, and you just shine a light on them and say, this is the way we want all of you are expected to behave, and set some tight deadlines. Say, these are the behaviors that we expect. We'll be looking across the organization for these, and if your team is still behaving in the old way, your team is under threat. So and stick to that. So be very explicit. This is not something where you just go, it's nice if you think about it. No, don't think about it. Do it. It's about action, and it has to be led from the top. And if you can't come in as head of L&D and say, I think this is the way we can do. You can work with your team, and you can make your team a model that the rest of the organization notices. That's fine. That's absolutely right. But when you want to change the organization, you have to start at the top and have good examples, and just look the benefits in the eye. What has happened as a result? These things, these products, these sales, these new ideas. That's what you need to do. And when everything is channeled through the chief executive. In my book, I contrast two real companies, but I daren't say their names, so I call them company A and B, both in the pandemic, both very similar in superficially. And one company just thrived. They just got it, and they just worked at it. And the staff just took on the mantle, basically. They made decisions. They went ahead, didn't ask permission. The other had staff paralyzed, waiting to be told what to do. And the result was there was a blame culture. People were summarily dismissed because this had gone wrong or that had gone wrong. They were too slow to react when there were challenges, like, for example, suddenly much more traffic on the website. First, company B had worked that out and was on it, and they retrained some of their shop staff to work on the website. Basically, they gave them basic training, and they became more and more expert. And some of them actually, to this day, are probably working doing the online stuff because they really love it. The other one just let the website crash. They had terrible Trustpilot reviews, and just everyone was demoralized and frustrated. They started out from the same position, really. So that's what you got to take hold of. And in the book, I listed 20 or so characteristics of company B as opposed to company A. And you could say one is tactical, one's strategic, but it's much more than that. One was autonomous and empowered, and the other just felt paralyzed. I daren't make that decision because I'll get blamed by my boss, and my boss won't make a decision because he's terrified of his director or her director, and the director won't make a decision because the board are really firing everyone. So you just get this incredible paralysis. And it happens to a greater or lesser extent everywhere, but it was starkly contrasted. In some ways, that was the genesis of the book. In 2020, I'm looking and thinking, how can this be? And I started to investigate, and that's what I came up with. So yes, all these points are really powerful. And thank you. And linked to that, just linked to that, there's a slide here, which is the model for organizational learning that I built based on these, not just on those two companies, but from lots of really great interviews with some fantastic people doing wonderful jobs. Some in L&D, but a lot not in L&D. And that's another thing that I learned, is that if you want learning to spin around your organization, it's not just L&D who do that. One of the people is a chief product officer, and he's doing the most extraordinary things with his team. But it's all based around this. And let me explain it to you. What I'm suggesting in the model is that you've got to connect people, and you've got to connect people socially. And as Andrew says, it's not just about setting up a forum, because you look at the forum and go, why do I have to do? What's the point of the forum? It's like I remember Etienne Wenger talking about communities of practice. And he said, you don't just lock people in a room and say, yeah, because guess what? Everyone looks at each other and say, why are we here? The sharing is the byproduct of solving problems and engaging and so on. So connecting people, but you need spaces to connect, and they can be online or physical. Sometimes, physical spaces in every building, like Zoom, when they reopened, created really engaging spaces that would attract people for discussions and brainstorming. And Zoom said, if you're coming into the office to do your email, might as well stay at home. You've probably got a better connection. So you build spaces and connect people, and you connect ideas. So problems are put out to the organization. The CEO doesn't lie awake at night tossing to how I get this major problem. You just say, we've got a big problem. How can we solve this? And you have structures in place to work on it. But you've got to test and measure. You've got to know what is happening in the organization as a result of these initiatives. So you need to look it firmly in the eye. And if things aren't happening, you have to change the model, change the procedure. But I showed this to the COO of MetLife. It's a big insurance company in New York, above Grand Central Station, huge building with MetLife right across the top, sit from all over New York. And what he said, we said, yeah, that's okay. I get the model, Nigel. It's very simple. The one thing that interests me are the orange bits. And he said, we don't focus enough on connecting, focusing directly and deliberately on connecting to the outside world and having an internal culture which is modified when the external environment changes. You don't have it's just more and more obsolete. It just doesn't work. So you need a permeable cell, just as the cells in our brain are permeable. They don't. If they were permanently permeable, they'd let out all the whatever they've got in them, the chemicals, but they have enough you can transfer stuff through the cell wall. And that's what an organization should be. It should be a permeable cell wall. And everyone should be praised for connecting to the outside world, not told to get on with your work. And what are you wasting your time doing that for? And most organizations, the people who connect to the outside are kind of weird, eccentric, the odd ones. They're weird. He belongs to all those things, or she belongs to all. She does all this stuff. Don't know why. It doesn't really help us. Yes, it does. So it's all about connections. All about connections. And Anthony, we got a poll. The first poll. I would be grateful if people could have a go at the poll. It should be easily available in the chat box. If you go to chat, if we're in chat, you obviously are. If you're the third heading is polls. So just tell me how you're doing. And what I'm asking for is, which is the most difficult element, do you think, in all of that? And I probably should have added a connection to the outside world as well, but I didn't. So therefore, we're not going to get very much feedback on that element. But the others, just tell me, what do you think is the most difficult out of those? It'd be very helpful to know that.
Come in, Nigel. They've been coming in actually throughout the session. So far, we've had 21 votes. It'll probably come as no surprise, given the audience, that our biggest concern at the moment is measuring impact. If there's one thing that seems to be a constant in L&D, it's how do we measure impact? So that's currently sitting at 71%. And at the moment, connecting people is second. Yeah, it's starting to shift, I think, as we get a few more votes. We're up to 44 now. Building shared spaces, connecting people, around about the same sort of distribution, about 15-16% on those. But yeah, a strong lead towards impact measurement at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's right. That if you don't know where you want to go, you can't then measure whether you got there. So you need to think hard about what you're trying to achieve, and that gives you the way back to the present, and it allows you to gather the data, the indicators that TP strategy talk about. The lead indicators, they're the ones you go for. What are the early shoots that will show that the organization is moving? They're the things you've got to look for. I think that's slightly more important than happy sheets. I could be wrong, but I would definitely try to spend time early to say, what are we doing here? What are we trying to achieve? And then from that, get some concrete points down. Then think, well, what would a lead indicator of that be?
Mm.
And work on those lead indicators. And then, right, we've got the lead indicators. How are we going to know those lead indicators are
Yes.
beginning to trigger? How do we gather
Yeah.
the data? What do we need to do? And it may be not abstract data. It may be going to interview people, for example, and saying, do you notice anything different? Or it could be something else. It really doesn't matter. So what I'm essentially saying is that if you want organizational learning linked to action, it's just a simple case. It's not a simple case, but it's just a case of working on all fronts. It's no good just working on values and culture, but ignoring those is insane. It's no good just working on outcomes, because the values and culture will trip you up. And it's no good just working on systems, because no one will know why we're changing the systems. So it's holistic. You need a holistic approach to all of this. And I think that is enormously important, that you think across all of them. And because you're working collectively, some people can look at the system, some people can look at the outcomes, some people can look at the values and culture and come together to look at transform. And I believe, I'm not using that word lightly, believe that we need to transform this organization. And when you see organizations that are transformed, it's one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved with. When you see organizations, those great, big, bulky, solid things starting to roll forward, it's really great. And it's also great to get the endorsement from people saying, oh, I love working here now. Oh, this is so much better than it was last year. Oh, I feel I'm really making a contribution that I never thought I was doing last year. So it's really important that you just start thinking about this. And then when you begin to think, you think of very simple things you can change, and then more complex things, all the while with that focus on outcomes. How are we going to know where we've got? How do we know when things are moving? And some of the indicators might be external indicators. You can ask customers and people associated with the organization. You can look at the external measures, increasing income, more efficient, performing better, whatever it might be. But you have to work on everything. It's no good just to be, but get the values right, and then we'll think about, you get the values right in the context of everything else that's changing. I think it's very, very important. And it links to, I keep using Gary, but I do like Gary, and he's what he says is right. I think that if you have a shared set of values guiding decision making with a profound sense of collective purpose, and when people feel valued and supported, their contribution just goes up. They're willing to do things they wouldn't have been willing to do before, and they solve problems and they move forward, because not everyone, I suppose there's psychopaths in this world, aren't necessarily wired for connection, but the vast majority of people are wired for connection and find it lonely working in an organization where, don't talk to her, let her do it on her own. This is her task. No one help her. No one help her. You're not back at primary school or secondary school where they've got crazy notions of learning. But this is adult learning. And what we know very, very simply is that, well, that where we have trust, where there's engagement and empowerment in a diverse context, it's not just an echo chamber, and where leadership reflects those things, then the collaboration, the sharing, and the purpose and the autonomy come together. And I discovered self-determination theory while I was writing the book. And that's 40 years old, 40 years of research. And what's self-determination theory? It's a theory of human motivation. And basically it's saying that an individual needs to have autonomy, whether that, obviously not total autonomy, but relative autonomy, needs to feel competent, that they know what they're doing, and to develop their competency, and they are connected. Those three things are basic psychological needs. that lead to intrinsic motivation. And the only motivation worth having is intrinsic motivation. I can promise you that. If you just think you can pay people a little bit more, you get into all sorts of deep problems very, very quickly. Or you think you can threaten people with a sack if they don't do this and they don't do that. It leads you to a terrible place, ultimately. So it's those two things that come together that are really important. And I promise you, you can check self-determination theory. There is one shed load of research that is still ongoing, showing that if you want intrinsically motivated people, you've got to connect them. You can't leave them on their own. And that's where Dan Pink got it wrong. You know, he did he used purpose instead of relatedness, whereas purpose, I think, comes out of autonomy and competence. I think he absolutely got that wrong in drive. So forget drive, focus on the research base of psychological need, self-determination theory. It endorses everything that I'm trying to say. That's not why I like it. I like it because it's robust and it's been trialed and tested all over the world. Therefore, I'm not making it up. And this as well, which is very important, that if this is Vygotsky, the 1970s, a Russian psychologist, what he realized is that what you learn on your own is limited. What you can learn with help, he called it the zone of proximal development, which has confused everybody since the day he invented it. But the zone of proximal development, if you can gather together a group of like-minded people, people at the same level as you, then the learning is accelerated, so it's faster and it's bigger. You learn more, you share more, you work really well. And it's split between knowledgeable others. You need people that you can work with. It's not about technology and tools, but technology and tools can really help this. So it's very hard to imagine in a big organization, this is all done with people sitting around a table. No, you need technology and tools. And if you go into Google and see the way they use some of the sticky post-it tools online and in workrooms, you know, they do both. And they leave them up for weeks and people come and play with them and they focus down on generating ideas together, regardless of geography. It's really impressive. They're so good at it that by the time I've worked out how to make a comment on a sticky note, there's 1,000 notes have appeared and they've gone on to the next thing. So I'm continuously running just to basically understand what is evolving before me, because they're so slick. They really know how to navigate ideas, cluster them, decide what action to take. And they do that always collectively. It's not about me. It's about, we are Googlers, they say, you know, this is what we should do. We're smart. We know how to do stuff. And they do it collectively, mostly together. So this is my little point. I'm going to stop here and ask Anthony to come back in. And then we move on to AI, and then we begin to wind up. Knowing precedes knowledge. That's really important. And if you take that away, knowing precedes knowledge, and you focus on the pathway of understanding the knowing, I think that's a very healthy place to be. Anyway, Anthony, any comments? Anyone wanting to throttle me yet?
No, absolutely not. Some really interesting contributions. There's a couple on a similar theme talking about not everybody's comfortable working in teams all the time. Some people prefer to work alone. And also sort of how do we acknowledge the contribution of those who are perhaps more introverted and are less comfortable
absolutely
sharing.
Right. Thank you. That's really important. And I would argue that you can be really introverted and prefer working on your own, but still be part of that team and trust that team and know that team. And I've been in teams where certain people, they do their bit quietly and they pull it back in to share. And it's amazing. It's usually makes everyone, all the garrulous people, for which I include myself, you know, let's brainstorm. Oh, I'll come in, I can do 500 ideas. And someone in the back who says nothing, feels totally excluded. So it's diversity that makes this. And the insight of someone who is introverted and prefers to work on their own is valuable, maybe sometimes more valuable than those who are garrulous. So I would completely agree with you that we need warm, cuddly people who really keep the atmosphere flying, but we also need people who sit quietly and think and then come back with their thoughts digested and moving and helping us all move forward, or take away some of the base ideas that a team are working on and work with them and come back and say, well, if we just change this and if we did that, they're often the biggest moments of insight. So what I'm saying is that when I say teams, I don't mean teams behaving in one way. I think teams can be very complex, but it doesn't differentiate or abnegate the need to have people working together. And if that introverted person feels massively part of that whole team and feels loved and cared for and valued, my goodness, they will change the world. It's because they're treated in a way that makes them feel undervalued and unloved and not being able to perform to the norm. That's a waste of space, just as other neurally diverse people. I've got an autistic grandchild and he is amazing, but you have to spend some time understanding the way her brain works, and it works very, very differently from my brain. But that doesn't mean she can't be a top performing human being. But you've got to adjust to that. The guy that one of the big advertising executives in the 60s and 70s in New York used to have a card in his top pocket of his suit. I haven't got a suit on. And every time he went to a meeting, he took it out and he'd read it, put it back in his top pocket. And on that card, it read, "Just remember, you might be wrong." And that's very powerful. And I think sometimes we just remember Katie's got a contribution to make. Just remember the loudest voice isn't necessarily the most powerful voice. And therefore you need procedures and systems to account for different voices. And that sort of facilitation skills are kind of core skills for business, I would argue now. Right, we probably should move on. I'll keep moving. This is AI. This is GP Strategies, Jeff and Ella. It's a really good list of basically 16 areas where generative AI is working in organizations at the moment. This is not fanciful. These are things that are going on now. From analyzing content to creating outline activities, for assessment questions, for creating synopses and summaries. None of this is unfamiliar to you, but you add it together, it's a pretty powerful productivity bonus. And therefore, I am driven mad by people who say, oh, we can write content 20% faster. And you ask, why? Why are you doing that? What is the point? And if that's what you think AI is, it's all about writing stuff faster, when it's really an assistant brain. But what worries me about AI and L&D is that if that is your domain, that you say, right, there's our agenda for the year, let's get that right, you're missing out on this. These are exactly the same 16, but put in a generic context for the organization. Everybody needs data analysis. Everyone needs survey drafting. Everyone needs scripting, critical analysis, help with structuring, questions to build an analysis strategy, identify different approaches. So if you in L&D take your expertise in the previous slide, you take this expertise and you generalize it into power for the organization, you have an agenda there that will put you center stage. Because if you can deliver all of that, you are delivering really basic productivity all along. And that's where I think AI is so useful and important. Not just because it does this for you, but because it empowers the whole organization. And when you talk that language to the CEO is listening. She's really keen on that. She's not so keen on saying, oh, we can do content quicker. CEO's bored, already looking out the window saying, oh, rescue me. This is really important stuff. But it's so easy just to transpose from the specific to general organizational needs. And I'm not saying that's your agenda. You've got to work out what is the most what are the most important, and pick the ones that work forward. But if you see your role as empowering the whole organization and not just empowering yourselves, I think we've got something really useful going on. And two more points, really. This slide from David Nicolini, an academic who I love. He talks slightly academically, but what he's basically saying is that where you should be located is in the daily reality of local tactics, pockets of resistance, dialects, collusions, and contradictions. Forget about the big grand constructions, the discourses, the paradigms, the models of our organization. Get down and dirty, like the fly, like we were talking about earlier. Get in the mess. And if you understand that, you understand the heart of the organization and the real challenges of the organization. And that gives you an agency which is so powerful, so powerful. And this is Elliot. Elliot came up with this idea, and I think he's right. I did a session with him in Dublin last week or the week before last, and he talked about self-engineering. He said AI is the perfect time, the perfect engine for self-engineering. And if you could get that out, we don't, we're L&D. We tell you what we're going to do. We're going to build this. If you say this is a tool that will help you develop yourself in any direction that you think is relevant for the organization, self-engineer. If you can create the conditions for self-engineering, I think you're going to have a fantastically faster progress in the organization, path to productivity and to success, than if you think it's about you doing the engineering and not passing it over to the organization to do their own engineering. And I think he's right. I think self-engineering is new and it's powerful, and AI makes that possible, probably for the first time in history, for everybody as well. It's not just to have your personal coach sitting there whispering big thoughts in your ear. Everybody can self-engineer, but not many people know how to, or feel they have the right to, or would know how to begin. And if you can begin that process of help, then that's great. That's really good. So now I'm just going to get to the last slide. And the last slide are 2 QR codes, which I hope you will photograph. The first one will give you 10% off the print book, but 50% off the ebook. My goodness, the generosity is beyond belief. But you need to use that QR code, and then the code is LDAP10. That gets you the discounts. And if you want to stay in touch with me, I'm releasing a whole bunch of instruments and devices for helping you analyze your organization or measure the performance in your organizational learning journey. Then you can just do that. Just scan that one. Or you can even be wild, revolutionary, and you can copy both QR codes and do both things. I'd be glad to hear from you. So, Anthony, that's the end of the formal presentation. We've got some minutes for any questions or comments, and I'd be very grateful to hear them from people.
Yeah, so a few that came in while you were talking, a lot around connectedness and the challenges thereof. So a couple of things around, do you think the pandemic had an impact on the way we connect with each other? And if so, where does that leave us now? Was one. And then on a similar vein, companies that are now asking people to come back into the office at least part-time, part of the week. How does that impact on connectedness? And I guess ultimately we're looking at, does remote connectedness work in a different way to being physically in the same space?
Yeah, these are really good questions. But in the 90s, and I'm sadly old enough to remember the 90s really well, there was something that people talked about all the time, which was presenteeism. Just turning up and being there, but not actually engaged, and doing as little work as you possibly could, and going home again at the minute of when the clock clicked across. And it's almost like we're getting back to that. I can't believe organizations saying, I don't care, you just got to be in the office at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And that's presenteeism. Now, what I think is a much better way of doing it is the way Zoom doing it, saying we're going to make the office so exciting that you're going to want to come back at least 1 or 2 days a week, because this is where you meet people. This is where the ideas get churned up. These are where things that have started online can be completed face to face. So if your office is one long boring row of laptops on a table, why would you want to go back to that? So the onus is on the employer, I think, rather than the worker, to the employee. And if you can make it compelling, I would go miles to overcome that. And I think that horses for courses. There are some people who have very comfortable setups. There are other people, working on a kitchen table with a wobbly chair. It's not so good working from home. So I'm very much in favour of working from choice. But what Henry Stewart in the Happy Company does, Wednesdays is everyone comes in on Wednesdays. So he's got a company Wednesday. And that's where policy is decided, everyone gets together, things that need to be worked out and resolved that happened, on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday and Friday. But everyone comes in on Wednesday. And that has worked for him and for his organization. So people are always connected, they know what's going on, and they're there enough of the time to be able to solve problems. Other organizations do it in different ways. But I think once you get into presenteeism, you're in a very dark place. All I care about is I've got to see your backside on that chair on Monday at 9 o'clock. Otherwise, you're in trouble. Because that to me is the exact opposite of everything that I've said. Absolutely everything that I've said. And I don't know why that obsession is.
Who'd have thought measuring effectiveness by bums on seats? Surely not. No function.
Who would have done? I've never heard of that. Anyway, maybe it's a new thing. It's a new thing. Any other points? That's a really good point. And I think that I think the pandemic, just to finish that off while you're looking for something else, what the pandemic did was two things. One, it made us realize that we needed other people, that it's pretty lonely when you're locked away. But we also realized that we can do a hell of a lot without needing to be present and be there. So it's that combination, which I think is actually really powerful, that ability to function as a small remote team, but also the need for people at the same time, and bottle that. But someone said to me, I hope there's no one from Australia, I think it's too late for Australia. They're saying in Australia, it's as if the pandemic never happened. They're just pretending to wipe it off and say, well, we used to come in 5 days a week. You're coming in 5 days a week from next Monday. That's a completely ridiculous. You cannot stop seeing the pandemic. It's just there in your consciousness. And ask people, ask them, what would you like? When Apple sort of laid down the law and 70,000 staff said no, then Apple said, well, what do you want? And those same staff came back with perfectly reasonable suggestions that were implemented. So trust people, trust them. People are not, if you believe that every one of your staff is trying to diddle you and do as little work as possible, and they're all hateful people that you need to whack round the head every so often, otherwise they won't even wake up, then you are in a very bad place, and it's not true. Most people want to do good work. That's my belief. There are a few psychos around, I agree with that. We've met them, and it's not pleasant, but they can be dealt with. So, Anthony, anything else?
I think that was
in
all
the 2 minutes we've got left.
We've got 2 minutes left, so if anybody does have a question that you think hasn't been answered, now would be a great time to do so. I guess from my perspective, the big thing that sort of resonating with me is where's the best place to start, Nigel?
Yes, that's a great question. It is a really good question. My answer is that, and this is a good place to finish as well, really, do your field work. Go out from your enclave, wherever that happens to be, and talk to people. And one really good question: what stops you doing your best work? What frustrates you the most? People will tell you. And if you take that list of all the blockages and you work out which ones can be delivered easily, and you deliver them, and you go back to those people and say, look, we've delivered this, then you are on the move. You are on the move. And you can go from small, simple, trivial things to bigger, knittier, thornier issues. But start where people are. Don't imagine you can have a big thought that, I know if we did this for people, they'd love us. How do you know? They may think it's the worst thing in the world. But if people tell you this is what I need, then then they need it. But the book, there it is. The book is real. And I'm going to give away a few copies. I'm going to talk to Anthony when we finish, and I'm going to select some people to have a free copy through the post, care of me. And you've got the QR codes. If you want to buy a copy at a discount that will be limited for probably only for the next 5 years. So you got to get in really quickly. Otherwise it will just go. And soon be 2026 and you'll go, oh, where is that discount code? Gone. Absolutely gone. So the book is full of case studies and practical solutions and ideas. I've just scratched the surface, and I'm always really pleased to get feedback as well. So if anyone wants to tell me they love the book or hate the book, I'll be listening. I listen to it both ways, and I promise you that if you're interested in what I've got to say, there's 50 times more somewhere. And we're at the end now. Anthony, thank you so much, Anthony. It's a real pleasure working with you. And you didn't have to tell any jokes.
I know. It's always a pleasure working with you, Nigel. Just lots of people in the chat just saying thank you, which is great. Lots of lovely positive feedback. And now lots of people saying, can I have a book? So there we go.
You possibly can. Anthony and I have to talk. We have to have a secret conference. And we will pick some people. Thank you.
We will. But for now, thank you everybody for joining us. I agree, it was a fantastic session. The next session is on Tuesday morning at 9:30, where the wonderful Don Taylor is going to be talking about moving to skills-based. Hot topic, no doubt, and I'm sure will be another fantastic session. So hopefully you can join us then. If not, then we will see you soon. But in the meantime, thank you very much and farewell.